Okay. All right. Let's finish up carbohydrate lectures or series of them. Okay. So, what is the basis of carbohydrate analysis using enzyme? I mean, this is an open-ended question, isn't it? So, what do we do with enzymes usually? How do we use enzymes to determine total carbohydrate? It's not as complicated as you might think. So, yes. Yes, exactly. So there are constituents within our food that an enzyme will be specific to it, that will act on it and give us a product that we can measure the absorption of light and use standard curve and determine the content. Now, that is in general, most of the enzymatic assays are coupled reaction. Do you remember what coupled reaction is? Yes.
The indicator reaction in like the second reaction, the first reaction, with the substrate.
Yeah. So we have two reactions basically. First reaction is the measuring reaction or auxiliary reaction that the enzyme is specific to our substrate or constituents of interest. The second reaction is taking a product from that first reaction and utilizing another enzyme to give us another product that will potentially absorb light so that we can do the detection. So first is measuring reaction or auxiliary reaction means the same thing. And then the second reaction is the indicator reaction because one of its products can be used to detect the presence of that constituents by absorbing light. What are the enzymes involved in starch analysis? Graham? Ah, yes, it is one of the enzymes. Once you get to the glucose, you have one of the enzymes that are. But in your starch, what do we need to do first? Is it pollinase? We can use it if the starch is gelatinized. Another enzyme, yeah.
What was that name? I'm sorry.
Pollinase,
Pollinase.
yeah. That is a debranching enzyme and it is required that the starch is gelatinized. What were you thinking? Alpha amylase is very important endoenzyme, but we need to break everything into glucose. So that one other enzyme that is important is glucoamylase. That breaks one glucose unit at a time. Then we have that glucose. Then we can use glucose oxidase coupled with peroxidase to determine glucose in a coupled reaction. First, we break all the starch into glucose, and then that glucose, we do a coupled reaction for detection. Okay. We stopped at dietary fiber. We define dietary fiber, everything in the food that does not get digested in the stomach or small intestine. So measuring dietary fiber, it used to be measuring crude fiber. And that method, we had multiple methods, acid and alkaline, digestion of everything, and then what doesn't get digested is fiber. Another one, you use acid and detergent to also digest everything except the fiber. But the fiber that doesn't get digested in both assay, in the first one, cellulose and lignin only. Everything else remains soluble and is lost with the solutes. So it's not a good method for determining total dietary fiber. The other one, detergent, with acid digestion and use of detergent, it measures cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. again, soluble dietary fiber like pectin, hydrocolloids, gums are lost and not detected. So therefore, this crude fiber method of analysis is no longer approved for food because we're missing all of the other good stuff, the soluble fiber, including pectin, or if we're working with oats, beta glucans, and such. So crude fiber methods are no longer used for food. They're only used for animal feed industry. Okay, so you won't find in your book anything about crude fiber. It was removed since the fourth edition. But I just kept it in the lecture to kind of, if anybody finds anywhere crude fiber method, do not use it. It's not. Okay. Now, dietary fiber is all the components of fiber, your pectin, your hydrocolloids, gum, cellulose, cellulase, hemicelluloses, and like everything that does not get digested, including resistant starch. Okay, so the method for measuring total dietary fiber is a pain. Very long. Whoever did you do that, or are you asking me a question?
I did digestion. So part of that was then figuring out resistance.
Where did you do that? In a lab, in a research lab, or? Okay. Okay. Yeah, it is very terrible. Did any? Oh, yes, of course. And Ressa can tell you how terrible it is. It's very long essay. So that's why we don't have a lab on total dietary fiber. We cannot complete it at all within the time frame. Anyway, so like anything with total carbohydrate or carbohydrate analysis, you want to pre-dry the sample if it has more than 10% moisture, and then you want to defat. So when you get a question in a quiz or an exam, what are the first steps in carbohydrate analysis? Dry, defat. Do not forget that. Okay. So dry, defat. Then you want to hydrolyze the components that you're not interested in. So you want to hydrolyze all the starches. So you gelatinize the starch and hydrolyze with alpha amylase. And then you change pH and temperature, digest with proteases to break down proteins. And then you add glucoamylase because you want to break down maltodextrin, everything into glucose. So you make everything soluble. Proteins into peptides, amino acids, and then starch into glucose. So these become soluble components. Then if you want to just get total dietary fiber, you can add alcohol and precipitate all dietary fiber, the soluble and non-soluble. Ethanol will precipitate everything for you, and you separate that from the solubles, you wash, and then you get the dried sample, you correct for protein and ash. So obviously minerals might be interacting with the dietary fiber. You might have some residual protein. So we measure protein and ash, subtract that from the total weight, and then you get total dietary fiber. Great, that's easy, but oftentimes, well, not easy, relatively easier than the next part, where you really want to determine soluble and insoluble dietary fiber. You have a question?
Spider.
Was there a spider? Okay, good. I don't like spiders, especially if they get on my head. What is that? No, that's worse than a spider. There are two of them or was just one?
One is going to. Right there.
Here.
Come in. Hold on.
Okay. Is that a flying cockroach?
I'm sure.
No,
It's a wasp.
Is it really a wasp?
I didn't see that. The way it flies. No, Hayes' legs sort of bad.
Sorry.
What did they do that?
All right. Why always this room?
Monkey for a while, so.
That's something in the chat.
All right, forget it.
Buzz off.
Stay with me. Buzz off. Oh, you reminded me of, have you ever watched Aladdin?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when the genie turns into a bee and Aladdin say buzz up.
It's unbelievable.
Be yourself, right? Okay, whoever watches me on YouTube now will go, she went crazy. Okay. Where was I? Okay, yes, determining soluble dietary fiber and insoluble dietary fiber. So on this step, when we hydrolyze, we don't use alcohol to precipitate if we want to determine soluble or insoluble. What we do at this step is filter and wash and separate into soluble and insoluble components instead of using ethanol at this step. So now we have the residue, the insoluble component, we take that, we wash with water, with ethanol and acetone, dry, weigh, determine protein and ash residual, and calculate insoluble. So that is the insoluble component. Now the soluble fraction, now this has soluble fiber, it has all of your amino acids and peptides and glucose and other solubles. So I separate my soluble fiber by taking that soluble fraction and adding to it, adding to it the ethanol and then separating the precipitate from the soluble. So take the soluble component that has sugars and amino acids and other solubles, add ethanol to that, precipitate the soluble fiber, do several washes, and then get the dry matter and determine protein and ash and calculate the soluble fiber. Then for total soluble, you add soluble and insoluble, you get the difference. So this is the lengthy method. It works, but it is very long. All right. We can use GC FID with flame ionization detection to also determine total insoluble and soluble fibers. So the different components we get from that same method of hydrolysis. Starch is hydrolyzed, protein is hydrolyzed. Then we take the polysaccharides, either the soluble and insoluble or all of them together, and we break them down by acid. We use sulfuric acid, break them down into monosaccharides, and then we derivatize the monosaccharides and use GCFID for detection. Uronic acid, which is part of pectin, require another method by colorimetry to detect them. Okay, so that's the GC. The last bit I have is pectin analysis. Yes, Rachel. Uronic acid. No, it's only by colorimetric detection. We cannot use GC to detect uronic acid. Okay. Yeah.
I think Rob did something.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Rob. Okay. Going to this last bit here that I have for you is pectin analysis. Sometimes when we have a product that only has pectin in it as a source of dietary fiber, like jams and jellies, we do an assay specific for pectin. So pectin is made up of galactouronic acid units. And the glycosidic bond between the galactouronic acid units is very hard to break with acid. So what we do usually is we saponify with NaOH. The saponification remove that methyl group from the carboxyl here because some groups have methyl, some don't. But the saponification deesterify removes that methyl group, and you only have all of them carboxyl groups. If you add divalent ions like calcium, you precipitate the pectin into calcium pectate, and then you measure the weight. That's how you do it. Okay, so for a +5, you guys, not now, as a homework, and this will be due next Wednesday before Thanksgiving. You want to give it to me on Monday? You can too. So, but you have till next Wednesday. So you have the data here, and you want to use the data that you have here to calculate soluble, insoluble, and total dietary fiber. So what is given to you is you can get the weight of the sample by getting the weight of the crucibles. Well, wait a second. So the weight of the sample is here. Okay. And then you use specific crucibles for measuring dietary fiber. So you have the weight of the crucible, MC, and then you have the weight of the crucible plus the insoluble fiber, and the weights of the crucible plus the soluble fiber. So the difference between, let's say, the crucible plus the residue minus the crucible will give you the fiber, whether it's soluble or insoluble. And then one of the crucibles, one of the replications, that is, will be subjected to protein quantification, and the other replication will be subjected to ash quantification. So you subtract the crucible weight from the crucible plus ash, you get the ash in grams, and the same for soluble. So now you have the protein and ash for the insoluble, and you have the protein and ash for the soluble. Okay, and then you always run blend, because you want to account for any fiber that comes from whatever you use, the crucible that you use or the filters that you use. So you will get the blank fiber plus the protein content in the blank and the ash content in the blank. So you use all this data to calculate insoluble, soluble, and total. Total is the summation. So you calculate insoluble first or soluble, and then you add the value, and that will be your total soluble. And you have, as you can see, you have 2 replications. This is rep 1 weight, this is rep 2 weight. So to help you, this is what you need to find: the average weight of your sample, the insoluble from rep 1 and rep 2, you get the average for sample and blend, and so on. So this information you want to obtain from the data and then calculate. Okay, so for Monday or Wednesday before Thanksgiving, bring it on a piece of paper. If you type it, you want to email it to us, you can email it to Sharu or Andressa. Okay, so that ends carbohydrate. We go to fat characterization topic, which is very interesting. And next week's lab is fat characterization lab, one of the greatest labs of all time. Truly, you learn a lot. A lot of data to process and a lot of connection and understanding. When you do the lab, you understand a lot the basics. Okay, so I'm not counting on you knowing these answers because you probably have not been exposed to any of this yet. So, but let's just do a knowledge check. Give it a go, Graham. Okay, that's an answer. That's another good answer. Rachel. Go for any. B and C. Rachel, you got it. What a cool answer. Yeah. So peroxide value is usually a measure of the initial state of oxidation. Primary is the first oxidation product. Is peroxide value. So peroxide value measures the primary oxidation products. Hexanol is a secondary metabolite of oxidation, so it's an indication of advanced state of lipid oxidation. Iodine value is a measure of unsaturation. So the higher double bonds you have, the higher polyunsaturation you have, the higher is the iodine value. But if the oil is oxidized, oxidation attacks double bonds, right? So the degree of unsaturation decreases in an oxidized oil. So iodine value gives you two different things. If it's a fresh oil, it's a characteristic of the type of oil, degree of unsaturation and type of oil. Whereas if it is not a fresh oil and it's been sitting there, you measure iodine value, it's lower than the characteristic for the oil, that's another indication for oxidation. So pretty cool, at least I think. Okay. Well, you know, you have 50% chance of getting this right. So why not? Yes, no. We just said iodine value. So if you were listening to me on the previous slide, you will know this answer. Please. So we said iodine value. Sorry, Sophie.
I'm just really excited about the qualification.
That's good attitude. All right, we said iodine value is a measure of saturation. Saponification value is not a measure of saturation. So it's false. And it is a value we use to estimate the length of the fatty acid chain. So it's an indication when you do saponification value for an oil, the value tells us the average fatty acid chain in this oil. It gives you an indication. We have to do a set of calculations though to convert saponification value into a molecular weight of the fatty acids. So we'll go through all this wonderful calculation later. So the answer here is false. Okay. All righty. So why is it important to do fat characterization? And when you hear fat characterization, what do you think of? What do you think of when we're what are we characterizing fat for? Haley. Absolutely. Saturated, unsaturated, cholesterol, trans fat. So we have this whole situation with the nutrition label where you have to report cholesterol, you have to report saturated fat, you have to report trans fat. So that's part of characterization. Okay, what else? What are we characterizing? What do we care for? Very important in the food world? What is very important in the food world? Stability. Yes. Stability. When you have oil or high fat content or oil content, over shelf life, you're gonna have rancidity develop. So have you ever tasted a rancid peanut? No? Okay, go buy peanuts, put a couple on your, what do you call it, counter. Leave it for a couple of days, come back and taste it. They're gonna be bad. So nuts, because they have really high cashew. Have you not tasted a bad cashew ever in your life?
I have some, I'll lose now. I'll report them.
Yeah, before that. So cashews can have up to 60% fat. So if you leave cashews out or even sitting in your cupboard in their container, they're gonna oxidize over time. So shelf life stability is really important in all foods that have fats and oils in them. So even the oil have a shelf life. When you go buy your vegetable oil to use at home, there's shelf life for it. There is a end date. And that's because after certain date, it becomes so bad tasting that you don't want to deal with it. What else? Tyler?
It's similar to labeling, but nutrient claim. Like, well,
Nutrient claim. Oh, so low in fat, free fat. Yeah, that's when you measure total fat, right? Yeah. Rachel, what were you going to say? What does it taste like to have this? You don't know what rancid tastes like. That's a good question. What does rancid taste like? All right, you tell me, Kristen. Cardboard. Good. So I thought you didn't know.
No, well, I had rancid berry the other day,
Yeah.
and that was, yeah, that was a
See, those
mistake.
ones I can understand, but those are like the dry, that are cooking on shelf stable babies, like, that's where I'm gonna go say how do I.
So, well, bitterness is if you talk about taste, bitterness is one of the sensations that you would feel in a rancid oil or something rancid in your food. But most of the rancidity is really odor.
You
So,
don't really smell it.
so you smell it, but even when you eat it, the odor, the flavor go, your kind of like combination of senses, it's flavor, odor and taste combined. So it's just an icky feeling. Kind of, it's grassy, grassy is a, huh?
Like you said, like oil can get rancid, right?
Yeah.
So, like,
But when you
if you're restaurants, like you smell it, but like if you're putting fish already in it, then it's like, that doesn't really.
But when you eat it, the flavor, you know, you have the inside is open to the nose and to the mouth. So when you eat something, it's a combination of odor and taste, the flavor and other thing. So if it smells bad, you can have that sense. All right, put something outside.
open a bag of potato chip.
Open the potato, have the potato chips, not the roasted ones, the regular potato chip. Yeah, absolutely. Try the rancid flavor. It's not good. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about processing effects. So have you ever talked in any of your classes about oil refining? No, I'm gonna talk about oil refining. Have you talked about oil hydrogenation to produce margarine, the vegetable butter? Have you talked in any of your classes about winterizing? No clue. No. Okay, I'll talk about winterizing. Of course, we deep fry stuff, right? So we'll talk about how frying can impact fat characteristics. So processing effects, I'm going to give you examples throughout. Palatability and sensory effects. So palatability, like something that creamy in your mouth, that's palatability. And then sensory, whether it's oxidized, rancid, whatever. So, but spreadability, if you have butter and if you add to it olive oil, the butter and room temperature spreads better than on regular butter because the or the unsaturation of olive oil gives it a melting becomes at a lower temperature. So sensory effects, whether from a texture or taste flavor. Safety, what do those advanced oxidation products, malonaldehyde or cholesterol oxide, what problems do they have?
I was thinking about like smoke point.
Oh, I'll talk about smoke point. I have a really good story with smoke point. Acrylamide, me and fire. It's just always a situation. But okay, so acrylamide is not related to the fat. It is if you have reducing sugar and asparagine, one of the amino acid in a protein, form acrylamide.
Yeah, I'm not remembering the right. It's whatever's forming the fat, the smoke point, that's like the blue color that you can see. I don't remember the right word. Yeah.
Google it. Google it and tell me what it is. It has to do with what and what?
Smoke point, like, it's like, what, the chemical that we see as like the blue. I mean, like the.
That is
the
smoke
smoke,
point.
yeah.
Well, you can Google it and tell me. But I was talking here is when you have advanced oxidation, you end up having malonaldehyde and cholesterol oxide, and these are bad for coronary heart disease. So, yeah, we don't want those advanced oxidation products. So you find it, what you're looking for. No? A C R O L Lein.
Yes.
Acrolein.
Yes.
What does it do?
Yeah, for you.
It's bad for you. Okay, it could be one of the oxidation that happens of some fatty acids during smoke point. Yeah, but I never heard of it. But okay, so safety. Good. All right. Let me see. Why do I have this asked twice? Okay. So nutrition labeling, we said saturated, unsaturated, trans fat, cholesterol, all of that is needed for the labeling. So we have two types of rancidity. We have oxidative rancidity and hydrolytic rancidity. What is hydrolytic rancidity? Do you remember? What's the difference when you hear hydrolytic rancidity and then oxidative rancidity? Tyler?
Hydrolytic rancidity caused by an enzyme in the food.
Yes. Or high temperature and water. So what happened? What breaks? What do you get? You have triglycerides, you have hydrolytic rancidity. What do you get? Free fatty acids, so lipases. So lipases are hydrolyses, so they break your triglycerides into free fatty acids. Free fatty acid tastes bad. They have bitter taste. So hydrolytic rancidity is breaking down triglycerides into fatty acids and release of free fatty acid. Hydrolytic rancidity can occur if you have endogenous lipases, or example, you're deep frying your potatoes. You love fried potatoes, but then you have this oil, and then you're putting the potato in the oil, and the potato is high in what? In moisture. So the oil is your fat, and then the potato is high in moisture. And with high temperature, water, high temperature is going to cause hydrolytic rancidity. So the triglyceride is gonna break into fatty acids. And then with time, what's gonna happen to those three fatty acids? With time, and you're using the oil over and over, and it's open to the air, oxidate. So free fatty acids are more prone to oxidation than triglycerides, which just have higher reaction rates when they are free than they are in acidified form. Then you get oxidative rancidity. That's why they tell you don't fry in the same oil more than 2 or 3 times. Because every time you fry with the oil and have that water from that food in that oil, you are increasing the free fatty acid and then also the oxidant. So that's why sometimes when you go get fries from one place and fries from another place, one tastes really bad because they probably reuse their oil multiple times, more than they should. And that is not safe either from having those oxidative metabolites. Okay, oxidative rancidity can also be caused by lipoxygenase. Remember? So there are lipases and lipoxygenases. Lipases break down the triglycerides into fatty acid. Lipoxygenases enhance the oxidation of these fatty acids or fatty acids that are esterified as well. So it could be enzymatic and could be a non-enzymatic reaction. All right. Development of food ingredients. So when we want to determine the characteristic of fat, we look at the food ingredients that are used as fat supplements, like olestra. Olestra is a sucrose and with 6 to 8 fatty acids. So it resembles fat in its consistency, but it doesn't carry calories. And also a short chain fatty acids in triglycerides, they don't necessarily carry high calories. So 1 gram of those might not convert to 9 calories. All right, so let's talk a little bit about processing effect. So do you know how trans fat is produced? So what is trans fat and cis fat? So cis is what we have in nature. So you have your hydrocarbon in your fatty acid. So you have these double bonds. And then cis fat is the H is in one direction. Trans is so this is not naturally occurring. So when do trans fats occur? Do you know? Okay, so during hydrogenation, sometimes incomplete hydrogenation can result in residual double bonds in transformation. Hydrogenation is done to produce vegetable butter, like margarine. So you can take the oil and then you can hydrogenate, meaning saturate the double bond, convert them all to single bonds. But if your hydrogenation was not done to completion, you might have the formation of trans fatty acid. And this is not good from a health perspective. Okay, so we talked about deep frying. So the development, the hydrolysis of triglycerides, and then oxidation over time of those free fatty acids. And then the hydrogenation. So sometimes to determine the effectiveness of hydrogenation, you determine iodine value before and after hydrogenation. So the iodine value gives you the degree of unsaturation. And after you hydrogenate, you measure iodine value again to determine that your hydrogenation was successful. Now refining, extra virgin olive oil. What does that mean when you hear, yes?
It means from when the olives are harvested to like the creation of the olive oil, it's less than 24 hours.
And then what happened to the olive oil? They don't refine it. So it doesn't go into the refining process. So the crude oil that you crush those olives and get the virgin olive oil has a high percentage of free fatty acids. So refining, what is refining is you take your oil that is being crushed, the crude oil that you have received, and then you add NOH to it. NOH react with all of your free fatty acids to give you what? NOH plus free fatty acid gives you soap and water. Okay, so, and then they centrifuge and they separate the soap and water from the rest of the oil. That's refining. Getting all that free fatty acids out by reacting them with sodium hydroxide, centrifuging, getting the soap and water, and getting that refined oil. So olive oil, you'll find in the market extra virgin and refined olive oil. Next week in lab, one of the groups will be analyzing extra virgin olive oil. Another group will be analyzing refined fat, and you're going to see difference in free fatty acid and rate of oxidation. Because the presence of high fatty acid content gives that oil short shelf life, because free fatty acids are more prone to oxidation than fatty acid in an ester form in triglycerides. So non-refined oil is prone to oxidation and has shorter shelf life than the refined oil because of that free fatty acid. Okay, so what is winterized? From the name, what do you do to the oil? After you refine it, what do you do? From the name.
I just think about like, you winterize your car,
So what do you do with the winterizing your car?
you don't want.
So what do you do with it? You add something different now. Okay, anti-freeze. Okay, so no, that's not what it is. Winterizing, take the oil, put it in cold temperature. So what happens is any waxes you have will sediment. So you're clarifying the oil from the waxy material. So this is very important because when you do salad dressing, let's say, and you sell salad dressing, and usually they are put in the refrigerator. You don't want them to cloud. If the consumer see cloudy salad dressing, they think it's bad and they don't buy it. All you need to do is clarify that oil from the waxes. So when you would put it in the fridge, it doesn't cloud. You remove that waxy material. Okay, so these are a lot of different impact of processing on the fat components. We talked about mouthfeel and taste. So, spreadability or how well they melt in your mouth, the fatty material. And then taste has to do with oxidation or hydrolytic, with rancidity, oxidative rancidity or hydrolytic rancidity. And we talked about oxidation products that could be harmful to you, including this guy over here that you found. Okay. So in terms of analysis, so all of this background, I don't know if you cover it in detail in other classes. Some you know, some you don't know. So that's why I spend a little bit of time on those. Because otherwise, characterizing the analysis will not mean anything to you. So why do we care about determining physical characteristics or iodine value or saponification value or free fatty acid? Doesn't mean anything if I don't go and explain all of that, what I explained already. So there are a set of analytical methods that we do for bulk fat or oil. So that means, corn oil that you buy, vegetable oil, butter, lard. So you have certain characteristics that you measure that confirm the identity of the oil that will help you determine whether or not its true identity or adulterated, whether or not there is oxidation, whether or not there has been refining of the oil. So a lot of these methods on the bulk fat and oil is really to identify the oil and confirm their identity and that they follow the specifications. But also, we measure free fatty acid to determine if hydrolytic reactivity started to occur. And then we measure lipid oxidation, measuring the present state, meaning you go buy an oil and measure at the time of purchase, whether it was oxidized or not. But if you're doing, let's say you want to look into a new antioxidant that you want to add to your ingredient or your food product, whether a natural antioxidant or a synthetic, and you want to determine its effectiveness. So you add it to your oil, you store it and measure oxidation over time. So that means evaluating stability over time to determine shelf life, to determine effectiveness of added stabilizers. Okay, and then there is the looking at the lipid fraction, cholesterol, unsaturated, saturated, triglycerides. So we do GC method and thin layer chromatography. So we'll talk about all of these different methods. Now, the last slide that I have for you before I let you go is sometimes you characterize the lipid component, fat component, oil component in a food. The way you have to do that is to extract the oil first. So if it's not butter, it's not oil, it's not lard, this food product that has fat in it, and you want to determine whether there is oxidation already or stability of that food product, you get the oil first out. And the way we do it is we try to use mixture of solvents to get out most of your lipids, the hydrophobic and the partially polar lipids. So usually we use a combination to get the oil out. While we do that, we make sure that we minimize heat, oxygen, and light, so that while you're getting that oil out and getting it ready for analysis, you don't change its characteristics. Then you will get into false results. Okay, we'll continue on Friday.
Okay.